This is Outside the Box with Asendia USA, a podcast educating U.S.-based brands, marketplaces, and e-tailers on international shipping topics and how they can expand their global e-commerce footprint.
Welcome back, everybody, to Outside the Box with Asendia USA podcast. I am one of the co-hosts, Nick Agnetti, with my other co-host, Jason Rowland. And we are here today to talk about Mexico. We've got special guests. We've got Leslie Foxhoven and Mike DiVincenzo. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Sure. I'm Leslie Foxhoven and the Executive Director at Asendia for Latin America and the Caribbean.
Beautiful. Thank you. Mike?
And Mike DiVincenzo. I'm a product manager at Asendia. I work with Asendia's commercial team, and my job pertains to expanding and improving our solutions to Latin America.
Perfect. Okay. Very good. So today's podcast, we're going to be talking about, kind of why Mexico. It's going to roll into a little bit of information about Latin America, probably talk a little bit, or at least there's going to be some mentions about South America. But for the viewers and listeners out there, it's really about just another area of the world to capitalize on or to look into if you're not there, to look into why you should be there. And or if you're currently going there, maybe come up with some, talk about some news in terms of potential regulatory changes, but also look at maybe some potential ways to do things better or different than what you're doing today. So, and again, our focus is to really help, shippers and especially cross-border shippers really navigate and make that process a little bit simpler and easier for those to really just help continue to expand and grow that business outside from the United States, going outside the United States, going outbound. So again, we did our introductions with our guests today. And then I guess one of the questions, and I don't know, Mike or Leslie, who's going to take it, but, why should a brand or even a shipper, in let's say a fulfillment space, shipping or fulfilling on behalf of brands, look to Mexico as an area of growth for their company?
I am going to take that one, Nick.
You got it, Mike. You got it.
Yeah. So, if we were talking 10 years ago, maybe expanding into Mexico and Latin America might not be the most attractive thing, but I could say since 2021, cross-border e-commerce sales have gone up 85% in Mexico, as well as other major Latin America countries. Mexico has the second largest market share for cross-border e-commerce in Latin America, only behind Brazil, knowing that Brazil is a massively populated country. Mexico's percentage of online buyers over the total population has gone up roughly 30% since 2020. The United States and China provide the two largest marketplaces for Mexican consumers to buy online, with the new regulations that were just rolled out January 1st, 2025, which we'll get into later. It certainly gives the United States a competitive advantage for selling into Mexico moving forward. And then lastly, I would say the biggest growth of e-commerce for cross-border e-commerce into Mexico has come from fashion, electronics, and cosmetics, which definitely aligns with the profile that a lot of the customers that Asendia has.
Okay. So, Mike, first of all, you definitely stole my thunder on the statistics. I'm a big stats guy, and you really you're taking the wins out. No. So
I
no,
apologize.
No, you're good. You're good. That's all perfectly, it's great information. You had shared some information before the call, as well as, there's information all over for, so for viewers and again, and listeners, you can find it. I think if you were to just dive into it, and again, speaking to viewers and listeners, often people think of, shipping directly to a consumer in Mexico, pretty challenging. I think most people that, if I'm in front of a customer, most people, their sentiment is, overall, probably not a great experience usually, right? And so we're looking to change that. I'm going to go into some statistics briefly because you covered some of it, which is good. But I thought it was interesting. So, and Jason, you probably could relate to this too, but so top B2C e-commerce market categories in 2024 and 2025 for Mexico. Number one by far was electronics, which I thought was interesting. And you're going to cover loss prevention and some other stuff in a little bit, but I thought, there's got to be significant risk in that, right? And again, you're going to cover that too. Number two, fashion. I expected that. Number three, food and like household goods and stuff. And so I thought, that's going to be interesting to dive into a little bit. Probably not so much in this episode, but great category to look into. And then, I have a couple of clients myself that are in more of this category. So toys, hobby, and DIY. And as, of course, a DIY guy that messes up many projects and makes many runs to the store, I think that's also a very interesting concept as well. And then beauty, health, and personal care. And I really expected that to actually be a little bit higher on the list, especially over number one was alarming to me with the electronics. And then the other one, so in 2024, because we obviously don't have 2025 statistics yet, was that Mexico held approximately 26% of the Latin American e-commerce share. That's huge. I mean, that's over a quarter of the overall, the pie, if you will. So I think for people, just thinking Mexico, I've had troubles in the past or issues, or I don't know if I want to get into that or invest money or time and the commitment of time into that as well. I mean, we're a huge number, $63 billion estimated in 2025. It could very well be worth the investment, time and resources to expand and dive further into Mexico. So,
are you an e-commerce business with questions about the new tariffs for Canada and Mexico introduced on March 4th? Asendia USA offers solutions to ensure your shipping remains seamless. Get in touch with one of our e-commerce experts today at ecommerce.usa@asendia.com.
Jason, I think you were going to talk a little bit about, some issues and such.
Yeah, so obviously there is a market there, right? So that's just kind of the data you're showing kind of underlies what the value of a Mexican market is. And I think, Leslie, for us and for what you guys are putting together, obviously when people are getting into a new market, it comes with new concerns and new challenges and that kind of thing. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you think are out there when it comes to the Mexican market? Well, what are we facing?
Yeah, well, there's a handful, but when you partner with the right teams, you can easily avoid those and have a really incredible experience. I mean, there's a load of them, and I wouldn't undervalue the importance of making sure you're partnering with the right people from A to Z, that these partners have honesty and integrity, and they're really partners that you can trust. And that's anywhere from your final mile partners to in between, also to probably the biggest challenge for a lot of people is customs itself. So you want to make certain that you have done your due diligence, that you know the rules and regulations, and that you're partnered with a broker and a company that is in good standing with the Mexican government and with customs and with Hacienda, the tax authorities, and that they are, don't have any suspensions on their licenses or anything like that, and that they're willing to give you the data in accordance with the law that will help you do your proper, input. And certainly at Asendia, we've got a lot of collaterals and things, and certainly some, people on our team that would really help educate the shippers to get around that. So yeah, if it's done properly, then that part should be, easy to avoid. Some of the other issues could be, there's been some new regulations. I think we might get into that later, but we certainly want to, make certain that we're aware of the new regulations that came out in Mexico and for January 1st, 2025. Be aware of those repercussions for your companies. And then we really don't have, issues with Chinese products, but certainly Chinese products went through a major, audit over this course of this fourth quarter. And they were really going after the Chinese companies and the brokers that were undervaluing their goods. And so what they've done is they've now put full tariffs on those. They no longer have a de minimis. But fortunately, because of our agreement with Mexico and Canada, if your shipments originate, not as a certificate of origin, but if they actually ship from the U.S., then we avoid all of those duty and taxes, and we get to benefit for the de minimis. So that's a good one, and those are just some of the high levels. Yeah. Some of the high level issues.
Yeah. So it sounds like as new companies come online, the service that you guys have created here does a lot of that stuff for them, right? So a lot of the groundwork's already completed for them. Those relationships with individual companies and regulators and in country are kind of taken care of for them. So it sounds like you guys are really helping people be set up for success there. As far as from the regulatory side, which is, I always kind of put a spin on it with that kind of stuff because that's my world. But I always had like Mexico, the big 4-letter word in Mexico was loss prevention, right? And it was always the thing that people always had the biggest problem with. They were scared of getting involved in that market. They were scared of the regulators. They were scared of kind of the realities. And loss prevention can get pretty, it really just hits your bottom line. So it makes a lot of businesses weary of getting involved in a market like Mexico. So when it comes to loss prevention, are there things that you guys have done or the way that you have your product set up that kind of mitigate some of those risks? Or so how do you guys handle loss prevention?
Yeah, so loss prevention, I apologize, was definitely one of the key points that we had in mind when setting up the solution. And some of the steps that we took to try and keeping that number of lost parcels very, very low, we utilize the largest and most trusted final mile providers within Mexico. Once that parcel gets in country, they get 4 to 5 different checkpoints before arriving to the recipient's home. That way, when the recipient and Asendia is tracking the parcel, we could see where it is at all times. All parcels are delivered with a signature confirmation, so no parcels are merely just left on a recipient's doorstep. Someone has to be home, sign for the parcel, and we get that POD for each parcel with the signature. If the recipient isn't home, the final mile provider will reach out to the recipient and contact them, schedule a good time that works on their day-to-day schedule to get that parcel delivered. And then let's say in the end, the parcel is deemed undeliverable or needs to be returned. We'll have all those parcels consolidated within Mexico and then returned to the United States itself.
Great.
Yeah. That Jason, so I think the multiple checkpoints, the signature confirmation, I mean, just from coming from the sales perspective, prior to this service, right? It's kind of, I mean, I hate to be so nonchalant about it, but it's like, some people just talk to you about, I shipped these goods into Mexico and they just went missing. And it was like, well, how can I recoup my loss and stuff like that? And there wasn't really a good next step, right? It was just kind of like, okay, things just went missing. And so if you're, again, if you're a viewer or if you're a listener watching, and let's say you're, and again, our network, which we'll get into probably a little closer towards the end of our talk today, and just it's all throughout really, but it's really focused on that DDP, that, duties prepaid delivery experience as a full solution, right? But, there's obviously still going to be DDU and DDP, but ultimately when we look at it, I think most people, and Leslie, you can probably, and Mike, and you could probably say that most people have probably had at some point in their tenure a poor experience shipping to Mexico. And so that's where I think these multiple checkpoints, the signature confirmation, that's awesome stuff. That's really good stuff. So no, Jason, I appreciate you bringing that up. And Mike, Thank you for that info.
Yeah. So Leslie, you touched on new regulatory changes a little bit there. Can you expand on that a little bit and tell everybody about some of the new regulations that we're facing?
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. It's a good time to take a nap. So
okay. Don't say no. She's kidding.
I'm just kidding. No, we had some pretty significant changes come through that, the governments have been negotiating over the course of this past year, even longer. A lot of it's modeled on some of the things they do in Brazil. But some of the things that became mandatory in January were that we needed, for the first time, a tax ID for the consignee. So anyone who is receiving a shipment, business to consumer, needs to supply their tax ID, or it's called an RFC, or if you're 18 or under, there's what they call a CURB. So that's your ID, so the government knows what you're importing. Their way to control that. We also need to, in the information we're providing to customs, need to make sure we have a very detailed description of the goods, which they typically weren't so picky about in the past. We need a phone number and an email address for them to contact that. There were de minimis waived for other countries. Fortunately, as I mentioned before, we didn't have that, so we still get to enjoy that $50 de minimis. And one of the changes is we can import things, not to get too convoluted, but we can import things on a simple courier type method using a T1 up to $1,000. We used to be able to do that to up to $2,500, depending on the issue. But so there are a whole lot of details in those regulations.
That's great. When it comes to customers giving that data in, though, when it comes to phone number, email address, tax ID. What happens to the stuff if it has to sit for a little while they're getting that to us? Does it have to be in the original data? Do they have a little bit of time if they're scrambling for it? How does that work?
Yeah. Fortunately, when we have good communication with our customers, that we haven't experienced too much of that. We're certain, that we explain to them what information they're getting up front. Most of our customers are shipping to other countries around the world that have, similar requirements. So they were prepared for it. So we have a few instances, and we certainly do what we can to work with our customer to get the information to help them where we need to. So it's been smooth. I could say that.
Yeah. It sounds like if somebody gets up with that product and doesn't have experience right with it, or is the first time they're experiencing it, it sounds like we're prepared to help them out with it, which is great. So as those regulatory changes, continue to come in, and I think one of the things we're going to talk about here in a little bit is the tariffs, right? As that big scary word that everyone's dealing with today. And Nick, I know you're excited about it. I think this is just such a dynamic market in terms of regulation and that kind of thing that it's really important for companies to know what the rules are and then know how those rules are going to affect their operations. So I think we're all in for it with these tariffs for a lot of these conversations.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us for part 1 from episode 15 from Outside the Box of the Asendia USA podcast. Stay tuned for part 2, where we talk about all things Mexico.
Share, subscribe, and download our podcast. To learn more about today's topic or for a free consultation, email us at ecommerce.usa@asendia.com. Come back for more insightful discussions on e-commerce shipping to Canada, Mexico, and worldwide.